Okay, next one, we're gonna have Adila. Can you introduce yourself? I know you just came.
Yeah, sorry, I just joined. Some internet connection problem. What I have to do now? Introduction. Just introduce myself.
Yes, introduce yourself and where you from. Yes.
Oh, okay. Hello, everyone in here. My name is Adila Cassandra. Or you can call me Adila or Dila. I'm from Bagi Data. It's a corporate startup innovation from Telkom Indonesia. Uh, um, yeah, I hope I can get more knowledge on UX from this tutorial. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one, Linda.
Oh, sorry. Hello everyone, my name is Lingga. I work in UX Indonesia as a researcher. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. And next one, Shamsu.
Hello everyone, my name is Shamsul. I'm from Malaysia. Hi Eunice.
Hi.
Hi Marcus. Actually, I'm teaching IT subjects in my university, and I graduated before from Australia, University Technology Sydney. And my previous supervisor was Laura Dyson and Tony Robertson. I come to this workshop to learn more about the current situation of user experience and usability in design. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Samsul. And we have Pak Sugiono here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yunis. Hello everyone, I am Sugiono. I am from UX Indo. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Ibu Dia here.
Hello, my name is Dia. I'm from Binus University. I'm a lecturer in Binus University in the School of Information System.
Thanks, Ibu Dia. And next one is Kadek.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kadek Dewi. I'm work in UX Indonesia as HCM. Thank you.
Thank you. And can we have Ibu Elida, please?
Hi everyone, have a good day. Okay, I'm Elida from Malaysia, and currently I am UI UX designer in cyber solution, mostly involved in the software development with government client. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Elida. And next one, Laswadi. I think you mute. You mute. Okay, we can go back.
My voice?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Lazwardi Indra Prasta. I am a creative video editor from UX Indonesia. So happy to join here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Anggi.
My name is Anggi. I'm from UX Indonesia.
I think you still mute. Yeah, we can go back to you and Junita. You also mute. Not sure. Okay, well, we can go back. Anggi and Junita are part of our research team, and I'll just introduce them to all of you. And yeah, they are dealing with a lot of government projects and also like industry project as well. So now we are like 2 minutes late, but that's okay. We're going to go directly to Professor Foth to introduce himself because his bio is amazing and very long. So I'll leave it to you to describe yourself then.
Okay, sure. I got a couple of slides that I'm going to use to introduce a little bit of background to what I do. But first of all, thank you all so much for joining this tutorial, this masterclass that Dr. Yunusari has put together for us. Really pleased to be able to have this conversation with you. I hope that it's going to be useful, and there's going to be a couple of moments where I'm going to take a break and hand it over to you guys. So we'll hopefully have a bit of a conversation throughout the masterclass as well. I'm based in Brisbane. and it's about just after 4 o'clock here. So it's also nice to see that many of you on a Friday afternoon, so close before the weekend. Obviously very excited to be part of this session. So thank you for joining. I'll share my my slides again that I just had open. There we go. Is this showing up?
Yes.
Great. I leave my chat window closed. Eunice, if there's any comments or questions in the chat and if I kind of in the zone, I might miss it, and just chime in and let me know that there's questions in the chat, but otherwise just interrupt me as well.
Yes.
So when Eunice and I talked about this idea of a masterclass and what might be a good topic to focus on, I thought I might share with you a little bit of work in progress. So we've been working at that intersection of interaction design, human-computer interaction, and UX for quite a number of years, and a lot of the attention and focus over those years has been on our practice itself, on our methods, on trying to perfect what it is to do UX design, interaction design. But more recently, we've changed a little bit, or we've kind of started to become interested in an area that is still relevant, but it's a little bit at the fringes, at the outskirts, if you'd like, of the immediate core knowledge of UX design, especially if you think of what we usually teach our students, or the kinds of body of knowledge or body of practices that you might consider to be about UX. And so this is about how we interact with government partners and industry partners. And so what I want to talk about today is some of that kind of work, some of our experience. I'm really keen to hear from you guys and hear about what your experiences have been of working with government and industry clients, and what are some of the challenges, barriers, and constraints that you might have run into as you do this work. And that work could be within academia, it could be within a university setting, but it could also be within private practice or in a commercial setting. So we're going to be focusing on these, what I call institutional constraints, and have a bit of a conversation of how we might overcome them. So that's the agenda for today. I did put a couple of readings into the Google Classroom environment. There is other follow-up materials I'm happy to share with you, or if you've got other questions, my email address is there on the slide, and I'm also happy to answer questions through that Classroom interface. So as I said, I start with a couple of slides just of who I am. Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. Marcus Foth is a professor at QUT in Brisbane, Australia. I've been at the helm of this research group, Urban Informatics, here at QUT, and we started this work in 2006, just when I was finishing my PhD, and it has evolved over the years. But really, at that original moment in time, it was about the coming together of the physical and the digital. So the time around 2006, and this is kind of a bit of a history section here of this presentation, was quite interesting, because prior to that time, a number of years, the internet was considered as very separate from everything else. The internet was described as cyberspace, as over there. You actually had to physically go online, right? So the term to be online comes from this time when people had to dial up. And so we had a bit of a separation between being in the real world and being in cyberspace, being online and doing things. And that has completely blurred these days. So Urban Informatics was really a research group that was created at that moment in time when these two worlds started to collide. And what you see here on the slide is a sign that we've had commissioned by an artist for our first research space at QUT. And the artist was asked to illustrate how these this very abstract notion of the physical and the digital, how can we visualize it? And so he came up with this visualization that looks a little bit like the Matrix, but it does have these elements of the physical and the digital. In a Venn diagram, it kind of looks like this. So we have a very interdisciplinary approach. We are trying to bring together people from a humanities, arts and design background, as well as from a STEM background, science, technology, engineering, and maths. So we are kind of trying to combine the left brain and the right brain and have people not just sitting together, but actually challenging each other and exchange ideas around theories, methods, and practices. The three main disciplinary domains that we are focusing on are around the social side. So it's kind of like the people side, if you'd like, that brings us into disciplines such as communication studies, sociology, community engagement. We obviously have quite a footprint in the technology arena. I myself have an undergrad degree in computer science. I then moved more into human-computer interaction and design. And then the third area that we represent is the built environment, the place-based, the physical aspect. So that entails research students and postdocs and so forth with a background in architecture, urban design, and urban planning. And so we position ourselves really at that intersection of people, place, and technology. This one here is a timeline. So I mentioned we started in 2006. It was around the time that the smart city became really prominent, this notion of the digital city. In South Korea, it was called the U-City, the ubiquitous city. And fast forward to today, this timeline was done by a colleague of mine, Anthony Townsend, and it actually was done around 2015. So it stops there. I think if you now continue it, there's far more of these research centers emerging that are also similarly positioning themselves exactly at that intersection of data, the real-time city, and then the kinds of design and digital aspects of it. There's a picture of who we are. This was taken a couple of years ago when we celebrated our 10-year anniversary. We are now a little bit older already in terms of the group that is working on these things. And we are also now part of a larger entity called the Design Lab. So our research has moved a little bit, and this is a slide that is just giving you a quick glimpse into some of the research foci areas, the research priority areas that I'm looking at and leading. The one at the top left, I'd call More Than Human Futures. So this one is a research group that has just been started that is looking at post-anthropocentric approaches to design. So rather than design approaches that are human-centered, we are now looking at a more than human-centered approach. That means that we are not just designing for humans, we are designing for planet. We're designing for planetary health and well-being, and that includes a approach that is much more ecologically driven rather than one that is only driven on human comfort and convenience. The next one on the top there is about data care. We do a lot of work around privacy concerns, governance concerns, data sovereignty concerns. So it is still positioned in that bigger notion of the smart city, but specifically with a very critical data studies lens that we approach those research projects in that space. The bottom left square is about digital inclusion. We got a growing team and its own research program that is looking at digital inclusion. It's an extension, I suppose, as well as an evolution of the term, the digital divide. The digital divide has been a term and a research area and a policy area as well for quite a number of years, but increasingly the way that people are talking about it is broader than just access. It's not just about getting people access to technology or access to broadband internet or access to devices. It's also about considering literacies, like digital literacies or media literacies, and then the kinds of usages that are required in order to feel included using digital infrastructure. And then the last one with all the cows there is about blockchain, actually. So we got quite a bit of research investment right now for a program of work that is looking at blockchain technology in agricultural technology arenas and food supply chains. So that's a bit of a new area that we are adding into the mix. So you can see that our work has actually diversified quite a bit. And so there is now 4 groups in a way, or clusters that have emerged. And as I said, all of this work is part of the QUT Design Lab, and you can see more and find out more about what that entails at that address. The Design Lab is now a larger entity that I founded in 2016. It also includes industrial design, architecture, there is a big emphasis and focus on design robotics, but it also has a quite a sizable program in design and health applications. So we've already done this. So thank you, Eunice, for helping me do these quick introductions. I might quickly just stop the screen because I want to see everyone. So once you've done your introductions, that was really, really useful. And I'm getting a sense that we got a bit of a mix of those in academia and those that are in practice. Can I maybe, I know that lots of people have their screens on, their videos on, which is great. Can I get a show of hands, either your actual hand or there's a digital hand like this that you can put as well, and give me a kind of a signal whether you are working with clients in either industry or government, either in academia or in private practice. Who's working with others outside the immediate group, with external partners, whether in government or industry? Just a show of hands. I can see one hand up, 2, Eunice, 3. There's actually now a second screen because we are so many. Oh, yep, there's some more hands up. Oh, that's not as many as I expected. I thought everyone's hand would go up and said, yeah, we're doing a lot of work with external clients. Is that right? There's only a couple of you.
Yeah, I think most of us are doing work with external clients, but in a different way. Some of them in the academic, they are working with the government a lot. So it's considered clients as well, actually, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, I use that term quite broadly. So maybe it's just the terminology. I kind of, in my presentation, I'll refer to them as institutions, and I'll explain in a second why that is. All right, so I'm going to go back into the presentation. Okay, so there's 3 parts to this presentation. I'll first go through a couple of comments about working with clients, I'd call it. And then there's another section where I talk about these constraints, challenges, obstacles, whatever you want to call them. And then the last part and the third part, we're going to come together and talk about what we might do to overcome some of those. What kind of methods or practices might be useful to overcome those constraints and challenges. So it sounds a little bit abstract, but I think once we get going, it'll become clearer, and especially once we have some examples from you as well. Who's seen this one before, or a version of it? Maybe just the part in the middle. Anyone?
The diamond is familiar, but the content is a bit different.
Yeah, it's a newer version. So it does have the double diamond there in the center, the red part. The double diamond has been made famous by the Design Council of the UK, and I got the URL in there, and I will share these slides with you, or maybe, I don't know, have we already uploaded them to that classroom environment?
Yes,
we'll make them available so that you can look at the web addresses later down the track. So the double diamond is a design approach, and what it pretty much entails is a rejection of just working towards a brief straight away, right? I had the pleasure of meeting Don Norman, who used to be vice president of Apple Computer and is now usability guru, I'd say, and quite famous in that way. And Don gave a guest lecture some years ago, and he explained what we are looking at here. And he said that he was given a design brief by BMW in Germany, the automobile manufacturer, and approaching this from a double diamond point of view, he rejected it. He said, I've read your brief, BMW, thank you very much. I don't think it's the right brief for me. It's not the right questions to be asking. So what BMW wanted from him, he said, required further discovery and refinement. And that's really that first diamond that you see on the left. So rather than going straight into the conclusions of this is the problem and this is what needs to happen, the double diamond is supposed to actually go one step back first. And you first then look at, okay, this is the the issue, the challenge, the task that your government or industry client has set for you to tackle. But what you really want to do is understand whether that's the right question to ask. Is it really the right task to be focusing on? And so that's why in this double diamond, if I move my cursor, are you guys seeing that as well? Yeah. So if you look here on the left where it says the challenge is actually understanding what is the right challenge rather than going straight into a solution, right? So it's actually, and if you think about it, quite simple. So in this regard, you actually first, and this is why there's this arrow here that goes back to the discovery phase. It's opening up because you're actually wanting to look at all the different possibilities of what is at the core here. You're engaging in a sense-making activity in order to discover all the different facets that are at stake. And then you kind of hone in again. So this is the second part that is called here define. And that's where you hone in again on what might be your starting point for the design work. So strictly speaking, you actually haven't developed anything. You haven't actually engaged in any work of creation. What you have engaged in is a work of questioning what's going on there and then identifying what might be a starting point. And then the second diamond, that's where we are looking at the development work, and we're doing alpha testing, beta testing, different versions, perhaps different ideation that is being developed to come up with possible solutions, and then they are being refined in order to suit and work towards an outcome, right? So this is in a way the theory of a lot of the design approaches, and it's not even limited to UX design or interaction design. It's also used quite a bit in industrial design and other parts of design. I see there's a couple of messages in the chat. I'm just going to check if there's any questions. Oh, thanks, Eunice, for, that's Don Norman's website. Genesis Researchers. Thank you, John. Yeah. If there are questions, are there any questions at this stage? No?
Yeah. Marcus, is it okay? Like if people asking question in Bahasa, if
Yeah, I just wanted to know if I'm going too fast, because I can't see many faces whilst I'm sharing the slides. So if there is any questions, just understanding what I just explained, let me know.
Ya, jadi teman-teman kalau misalnya apa namanya ada for some people, some friends from Indonesia, if you find some of the concept is quite difficult to rada susah untuk diterjemahkan, mungkin bisa ditanyakan dalam bahasa Indonesia, nanti kita bantu aja, nggak ada masalah. Okay, Marcus, thank you.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go on to the next part. But yeah, do chime in anytime. So this photo is from the Hasso-Plattner Institute. It's part of the network of these schools, of design schools. So the Hasso-Plattner Institute is set up at the University of Potsdam in Berlin in Germany. They do quite a close collaboration with the D School in Stanford. And they've also, a couple of years ago, founded the Global Design Thinking Alliance. And QUT is one of the founding members. There is Genovasi in Malaysia. If you go to their website, the Global Design Thinking Alliance, you see a whole bunch of nodes and members. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this is because the double diamond that I just had on my previous slide, it shows a certain, process. It goes through these phases of discovery, define, develop, and deliver. And what does it look like in practice? Well, a lot of the time when you go into design spaces, whether it's a classroom, whether it's a studio, whether it's a workshop space, it kind of looks like this, right? Have you seen this? Is this familiar? I'm getting a couple of nods. That's good. It's hard sometimes giving these presentations over Zoom because I'm lacking the feedback from my audience. So the way that design approaches things is often through having dedicated spaces. And so this space, for instance, might be familiar to you. It has whiteboards, it has post-it notes, it has movable furniture. You can see the furniture here is on wheels. People in this corner are looking at something on their laptop. This person is drawing scribbles on the window that can be then erased later. Post-it notes everywhere. And there's another ideation going here on the left side. So it looks in a way a little bit messy, but it's part of that creative process, I suppose. Design in a way thrives on complexity, and design also thrives on uncertainty. And so design in a way creates these spaces where some of the kinds of expectations of other workplaces are put on hold. And that is quite an interesting and I think important insight. When you work with government clients or industry clients, they don't necessarily work like this. Some of them might do if you work with, say, consultancies with like KPMG and McKinsey and those guys, because they have started to adopt design approaches. But other industry and government entities, they don't necessarily work like this. It might actually be quite foreign, and it could be, for some people, challenging. For other people that you're working with in industry and government, it might be very exciting because it looks very playful. It looks very colorful. It looks like it's, a very free-spirited kind of environment. But what is quite important to keep in mind is that this kind of environment that we kind of take for granted because we are often in that environment, that is not necessarily the kind of familiar environment for the people that we are working with in government and industry. And that is an important point I'm going to unpack a little bit. Now, Eunice and I discussed this little meme that I've appropriated for UX design. And it shows you a bit of a tongue-in-cheek take of it. This meme was actually originally when I found it about peer review in academic journal articles, but I've repurposed it for UX. So you can see that as drawing the scribble of the Mona Lisa when the original idea that you had, and then you pitch it to the client and it's just perfect in the original pitch. Then the contracts are signed, but the contracts might already entail that they didn't have the full amount of funding, or maybe the timeline is really tight. So it's already a little bit, not quite right. And then you're working with multiple people. There might be a junior person that has just started, or an intern that has just come and joined the team from the university, fresh out of their design degree. And so what they perceive is just very blurry and very sketchy. They don't quite get yet what's going on. And then, as we said, in the double diamond, there's these delivery phases. You got the alpha version, you got the beta version, and they might still a little bit be shaky. But then obviously you want to shine. And so in your client presentation, you have like this very impressive version of your UX design. And then it's taken over sometimes by a company, or, even if it's an industry partner or a government partner, they have their own marketing departments, and they turn it into something else altogether because they have aspirations for making money and selling it. So it looks different yet again. And sometimes if this process is going through too many hands and it isn't well controlled, the actual user experience is actually really unsatisfactory. So this is something that we want to think about, because what we want to tackle is a approach to working with industry and government clients where some of these realities are actually being considered. We don't just leave them up for serendipity or random kind of developments, but the theory and the practice actually need to come together, rather than us talking about this double diamond as some sort of theoretical thing, and then the reality looks like the Mona Lisa on steroids. There is 3 terms that I think will be useful in our discussions, and they come out of design research. Specifically a field of design research that is called participatory design. Sometimes we refer to it as PD. The participatory design community kind of started in Scandinavia, and it has a strong emphasis and approach on engaging the future users of your product in the design and development process. Now, I want to explain to you infrastructuring institutioning and commoning, and I hope I'll do this relatively quickly. You can see that they are all what we call verbifications. So the actual noun is infrastructure, institution, and the commons. And then the ing at the end, it turns the noun into a verb, into something that we do. Now, how do you do infrastructure? Or how do you do institutioning? That's really weird. It kind of doesn't make sense at first sight, but I'll hope to explain it. There's some person, it sounds like there is like a lawnmower going. I don't know if someone could mute themselves with that background noise. I don't know, Eunice, can you see who's making all that noise?
Let me check. Okay.
Oh yeah, cool. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to try a very simple example, which is a smartphone. We probably all have smartphones, yeah? It doesn't have to be the Apple iPhone, but just think of the smartphone in general. Now, from a design point of view, a whole bunch of design goes into that product, right? There is the interface design, there is the UX that deals with the user experience of interacting with it. There is the product design, there's the industrial design of the form factor. So there is so much design that goes into that artifact. But what I want to draw attention to is that Apple as a company is not just thinking of the iPhone as a thing, as a product, as an artifact. It's also thinking about it in at least two of these terms. And so I explained the first one, which is infrastructure. So what's the infrastructure that makes the iPhone work? That's the App Store. That's only one of them, but I'm just going to mention the App Store. So the App Store, or if you have an Android phone, the Google Play Store, is not something that is built into the phone. It doesn't form part of the phone per se, but it is the infrastructure in the same way that a train needs rails in order to have any kind of function of going anywhere, correct? So the iPhone or any smartphone wouldn't be anything without the App Store constantly delivering innovation back to the phone, because there is a whole ecosystem of designers and developers working on apps. And so it creates a living ecosystem of these apps being loaded onto the phone, and it actually creates value. And that is that kind of relationship between the thing, the phone as the artifact, and the infrastructure that makes it much more than just the phone, right? If I didn't have the App Store, how much is this actually useful, right? If I couldn't load any apps onto my phone, then the phone itself, it might still be, enabling me to make phone calls, but that's it. But the fact that I can use it as a thermometer, calendar, recipe kind of collection, and the list goes on, there is like millions of apps available. That is part of the ingenuity of designers thinking beyond just the artifact. They actually started thinking about the infrastructure to make that possible. And so that is what's meant by infrastructuring, where designers are thinking of their thing, the immediate artifact that you are designing for. But then they're already thinking about the next step being, what is the infrastructure that needs to be in place in order for my design artifact to come to life? Okay. I suppose you can even consider that, a phone needs electricity, and so it needs to be charged. That is part of the infrastructure as well. Now I'm going to go to the next one. We're going to focus a little bit more on institutioning later on the track, but again, keeping this example of the phone also wouldn't really work well if it couldn't connect to standards with regards to Wi-Fi standards, Bluetooth standards, GSM standards, 3G, 4G, 5G standards. And so I listed a couple of those, right? So if Apple hadn't considered any of these institutional arrangements in the world, and you are flying from Australia to Indonesia, or you're flying from Indonesia to Europe, and these standards are not in place and institutions haven't agreed on those, then the phone would stop working. And in the old days, that was actually the case. In the old days, and I'm old enough to remember, when you were flying from Australia to Japan, you had to buy a new phone because Japan was on a different wavelength. They had different standards and different Japanese only phones that you could only use there. And the same in Europe, and Europe was incompatible with North America, and the list goes on. So part of the institutioning side is designers thinking about institutional arrangements that also have to be in place for your designed artifact to work. In the case of the phone, it is a whole bunch of standards that ensure what I'd call interoperability, right? So the fact that this phone can work where I'm in, and if I travel overseas, it can connect to the different bandwidths and wavelengths that are used in other countries. And then the last one here is common and the commoning. Now, commoning is quite easily explained as challenging the economic kind of expectations and assumptions. So the normal expectation in design would be that whatever you design, you're going to sell, correct? In a lot of these kinds of arrangements where UX designers are hired or commissioned to work on artifacts, on designs, they usually operate in some sort of commercial environment where we are considering that there is economic arrangement. So in the case of the phone, Apple wants to sell it. The prices right now are there. And so that's not really commoning at all, because commoning is when designers actually question whether their artifact can be introduced into a different economic framework that is based on the commons, which might be that it's sustained by the different users producing services or innovation that makes it happen without that it's just based on pricing. So the commoning one is not really the one that is possible with, you know, big corporations such as Apple or Android with the Google phones and so forth. But there is now a lot of designers that have started to think about commons and commoning as part of their design work. Now, today, I'm going to be focusing on that second term, which is the institutioning term. And I'm not going to mention infrastructuring or commoning, or I don't go into that level of detail, but it is actually a triad. It is these three terms, and they all have a relationship with each other. Now, I'm going to pause again, and I wanted to throw it out to you guys to just hear a little bit about your experience working with industry or government partners. And I'm just going to catch up on the chat there.
Oh, we just had a chat. Yeah.
Okay. So then, yeah, that's cool. They're just comments. So that's great. Yeah, if there's any questions, let me know. But what I wanted to throw to you guys is to just maybe give me any kinds of examples of where you used your design skills in a partnership or collaboration with industry or government partners. Eunice, why don't you start? I know that you're working with industry and government partners all the time.
Well, maybe I will just start. Well, today we have a really good discussion. Actually, like one of the government agency actually wants us to do something for them, right? And this is very interesting because when we have to submit a proposal, we have how do I say, like we curated like what is the best solution for them, right? But at the end of the day, like what they see is not how we can actually help them, because we actually have a lot of discussion with them, like what kind of problems, how we actually can address that problem with the UX approach, UX method. But then what they look is like, oh, you are like a few millions less than the other, you are few million more than the other, so I'll take you. I mean, like we know both of the proposal, one is good, one is bad. Like, okay, well, doesn't really matter. The most important is like how much money like you charge for that kind of project. And
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I don't know whether it is related or not, but it is more like a, for me, it's like the Mona Lisa, the second one before before the end, which is
Yeah.
like a how good you actually like you present it commercially. We
Yeah.
got the
Oh, good.
project anyway.
Now that's a good example, because I'll get back to that issue of funding and budgets and so forth. Anyone else would like to volunteer a story?
Ada yang mau sharing cerita-cerita? Please go ahead. You can tell in bahasa Indonesia if you want to, or bahasa Malaysia. Syamsul maybe. Oh, Adila, yes. Okay, Adila, please.
May I ask something first about the
Yeah, please do.
about the commoning. Do you have another example of about the commoning that you just explained? I was curious about
Yeah, so one project we've just written this up and submitted it to the Design Studies Journal. It's with colleagues in Denmark at Aalborg University, and they introduced a commoning example, whereas what we did in that paper was introduce an institutioning example. But I'll explain to you that commoning one that they've done, which is a community radio station in Romania. So they were working as a collective team of designers, some with interaction design skills and others had more technical skills. And they worked with the local community to try and figure out what can we do in a part of the world where there isn't lots of broadband internet access, in order to get the community to be able to talk to each other and have a sense of communicative kind of fabric. And they actually went all the way back to something that has been around for a long time, which is community radio, which is where you tune into a certain frequency and you can listen to the local radio station. And they set that up. The reason why it was following a commoning approach is because it wasn't a commercial radio station. So the idea wasn't that in order to make this work, we have to have a business plan and we have to sell advertisement space on the airwaves to then charge companies for the benefit. They try to find a way to make it sustainable in the sense of the community being able to continue operating that community radio station as volunteers. And so they needed to think of, well, who's going to be able to produce content, who's going to be able to be on the microphone, who's going to be able to do the scheduling. So there's all these tasks that you would have with any radio station, but they did it all part of a volunteer effort. And so the commoning approach is similar to the commons you have in a city, for instance. It's a shared resource, and everyone in a way needs to give a little in order to benefit a little, right? So it's different to money and financial transactions where you say, I want the phone, I'm going to pay 1,200 Australian dollars, and now you give me the phone. It's like quid pro quo. In a commoning approach, everyone actually needs to do both, benefit and contribute to the resource that they want to share in. Does that make sense? So commoning is very different to strict financial transactions that we are mostly familiar with, right? I want a food, I order food, I pay for the food. But commoning could be that there's a communal kitchen and we all cook and we all share the food.
Is it can we say like it adapt with the current situation or condition in the place or in the problem that we face? Can we say that?
Well, I think commoning isn't a solution or an approach that is applicable to every single design scenario. It is kind of an interesting take that questions the economic frameworks or the economic assumptions, right? Usually in 99% of cases, we don't even think about it. We kind of think, well, as Eunice just provided that example, there is budgets, right? So you get, for instance, to submit a response to a tender, because a government entity or an industry partner has said, we want something to happen. And so you guys are all submitting your proposals, and then we look at your budget. How much money do you want for this type of work? And so in those scenarios, we never question whether something could be achieved in a different kind of economic framework. And commoning is this kind of different economic framework where different people come together to collaborate.
Okay, okay.
Whilst we might listen to Adila, did you have maybe also, you said maybe an example of you working with a client, like a government or industry client?
My experience?
Yeah.
Oh.
And then in the meantime, I'm going to Google a paper on commoning. So if you're interested, you can have a look at it.
Okay. Maybe my experience in working with the government is that actually now in working in the government, but it's a own state enterprise. Actually, the project that I've been working is a corporate startup innovation. So I working somehow like a startup, but I also sometimes serve the government. I mean the Telkom Indonesia. What I've been facing is that maybe sometimes the top management ask us to like make something, but not sure whether that is from a good research or just they want to make the solution or the app or something. So I think sometimes they just like tell us to make something, but not sure whether where it came from, like the research from it and stuff like that. So I think that's the experience that I've been facing for right now.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Anyone else? Does that resonate with anyone else, or do you have other experiences you might want to quickly outline?
Maybe I give
okay.
Sorry, Eunice. All right. There's one experience. Once this national television has interviewed me as the guest during the pandemic COVID-19, and we discussed about what are the sort of application solution design for COVID tracing, COVID, taking all these patients and tracing these people around. I don't know about Australia. Maybe you have, let's say you want to enter a shop, you need to scan the QR code, then it appear and we record the database and we inform everyone. And it seems that it's like an idea that I propose that you should, I think I give an idea proposal, you should integrate AI and data science to this because it will help better your application. And in the evening is some sort of like they have discussed it in the parliament and say, we are going to use AI and for all these matters, out of sudden. And then I say, okay. And then at one moment when they produce the application, it's not just like, as useful that people can use. It's very confusing. I don't think they tested it thoroughly. I don't know whether I should speak about it or not, because there's lots of flaws in the application, including the data representation. I think maybe they miss out something in the journey. Maybe they in very rush way to produce this type of applications. And just as the application work, it doesn't matter whether this application has those design features, usability, or else. Because it seems that the application, all the functions, they put it into one interface. So it's very confusing to the user. And all of a sudden, you are forced to scan, whether you are not want to scan or not. You understand? So you are forced to scan. Suddenly it appears you must scan. So it's very, I don't know whether they think about the design of the application very carefully. I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, so that's really an interesting example, because not only does the COVID-19 pandemic really demand and call for a whole bunch of technological solutions for the contact tracing, for the communication side, for the analysis side, but it also brings us in touch with government entities, because they are the ones that are currently in charge of the health response, the public health response, the community health response. At the same time, that's usually not their expertise. So they are bureaucrats, they deal with policy, they deal with taxation, they deal with a whole bunch of risk assessment and risk management. And so in Australia, it's a similar scenario where both state governments as well as the national government has been engaging and commissioning a great deal of advisors, because they're trying to make sense of how do we best go about it. I put in the chat there a paper that is tracing some of the developments in that space of apps that have now since been developed across the world. And also it has a focus on the collaboration between Apple Computer and Google, which is called the privacy preserving framework that they've created in collaboration with some of the health authorities in different jurisdictions. Australia, interestingly, is not subscribed to it. I don't know what the case is in Indonesia. I don't know, Eunice, if you know, whether it has subscribed to that Apple-Google partnership, you know, the ENF?
Not that I'm aware of, yes.
No, okay. But in any case, it's a little bit of a tangent for us, but it's still a good example we can use later on. And there's someone who's got a hand up. Is it Deja?
No, it's Hayu first and then Deja. Yeah.
Oh, Hayu. Yeah, sorry, that's how I say your name. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Prof. I just want to share about my experience working with the government, both as someone who works in UX environment and also as an academic. I got to say that when it comes to work with the government, it requires a lot of patience and also flexibility, in a sense that we have to deal with, I would call it limitation, but also it's a strict budget or strict policy that they are not, that it's not easy to convince them to accept what we propose. And also sometimes it's not just because of the budgeting or something, but also because of the rules and the policy as a institutional organization, something like that. So it is harder, in my experience, to convince them to believe that we are doing this for their favor, and also to get the recognition that we deserve. That's what I reflect on from my experience. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Hayu. When you said that you have to have patience with those, especially say government partners, is that because, can you maybe unpack this a little bit? Is it because they're risk averse?
It's more that it's always back to back. So we come with this idea and then we propose something based on the research or something else, or initial program, and then we kind of like, okay, but this is not meet this rule, or this is kind of violate this policy, because they have their own standard as a government institution.
Yeah.
And then so we got to it's a long process. That's what I say with the patience. It's longer than, for example, when I work with partners that it's not in a government environment. So it's the process of I don't know what to call it. It's a participatory design, or it's just like the cooperation. It's longer. It's longer than usual. So
yes.
To get them to understand that what we are doing as an expert that they hire, to convince them that we are doing this for their favor.
Yeah. No, that's good. And Eunice, do we have one more?
Yeah, at JC there are things that she's just commenting. I mean, I guess she can't really talk at the moment, but she'll come back when she's available. She's listening to the business, but she'll come back with more questions later.
Okay.
Marcus, can I ask you again? Can you please type the name of the agreement between the Google and what is it? What was that? Facebook, was it? Or that you mentioned Australia have before? What was the name? So, we have Haliana.
Sorry, I'm just Googling it. It's.
Don't worry. We can do it later. That's okay.
So it's. I quickly share it and show it to you.
Okay.
If this is of interest, it's not an app per se. What it is a development framework, and it's now called the Privacy Preserving Contact Tracing Framework. And you can see it's a collaboration between Apple and Google, which is a little bit unusual because in most cases they're competitors. They don't like each other. In fact, they are suing each other all the time. But they actually work together on this. And so there's a whole bunch of development specifications for what's called exposure notification. So the exposure notification framework, or the ENF, is this development framework that these guys have created. And what has happened is that they went and created this collaboration, and then they took it to different health authorities across the world, to the US, to France, to Germany, to Australia, probably to Indonesia, and said, you should adopt this. And so when you adopt it, you can go into your phone. I can't do it because Australia decided not to adopt it. But if you're in a country where it has been adopted, the phone can automatically in the background do the contact tracing.
Okay, that's really cool. Oh,
that is a link with a bit more information about it.
Yeah, no worries. It's all right. Thank you very much. There's another question before you continue. If you want to answer this one from Shamsi.
Yeah.
How can participatory design assist with the process of institutioning? Would you like?
Okay, that's a good question, and I think in the next part we're going to get to that question in a little bit more detail. But maybe just to give you a bit of an answer now. So, in a nutshell, the term participatory design entails that we as designers are engaging with the future users, right? That's in a way why we are referring to this part of the design community as engaging in participatory design, because we are interested in doing not just user testing at the end. It's actually a commitment to having the future users participate in the design process throughout the entire double diamond, from the ideation phase to the deployment at the end. Now, if we are working with, say, a government entity or an industry client, that same commitment to participation can actually continue on to also be applied to the people you're working with. So what usually happens is you get these meetings, right? So you meet your clients at certain points of the project. Maybe in the beginning, you can negotiate. Then you have approval of the contracts. Then you kind of have a meeting about the initial set of, specifications. You refine your original tender document, and then you want to present the alpha version and see what they say and so forth. Now, through a participatory process, you don't just treat your client as a client in a way. You treat them, or you kind of elevate them to be co-investigators or co-designers with you, so that they have much more ownership of the process. Now, that seems a little bit daunting, but maybe we'll go through the slides and I'll explain a little bit more of how we've tried to make this work. Are there any more questions before we go on?
No, at the moment that should be the question that we have. And I guess I would have more questions in regard to how you do it, but I think you're going to explain it further, right?
Yeah, I think once we go into the next section, it might become a little bit clearer. Where did my presentation go? Here it is. Okay, so thank you for participating in that part. So we're trying to be participatory here as well in the classroom. So this section is the third one. And here we're talking about the institutional constraints. And I'm actually borrowing from work that colleagues of mine have done. It's based on this paper by Thomas Laudato and Carl DiSalvo. They are both at Georgia Tech, or at least at the time there was. Carl is still there. And this is a paper that they presented at the Participatory Design Conference. This specific paper is looking at the work that these guys have been doing in a project with a local government. Local government, Yunus, what's the term for Indonesians? Is it council or is it municipality, or what is the, like the government of the city?
Oh, wali kota, kota madya, or wali kota, kota madya, and then That's the municipality, and they have provincial after that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So this is kind of at that local level. In Australia, we call them local councils or local governments. The Americans, I think, usually say municipality. Anyway, so this is derived from them reflecting on their design work with the city, and specifically around kind of civic design. And the three constraints that they identified are called the sandbox, the administration gap, and the ideological mismatch. And I think it's already a good step to just be aware of these constraints and giving them a name, because once you give something a name, you can actually identify it more easily and kind of say, oh, I know what's going on here. It is this. And then you're more able and more capable to respond to it, which is the last section that we get to. So let's look at these. The sandbox, I think, is the easiest one to explain. And I already alluded to it with that picture, this photo that I showed you earlier from the Hasso-Plattner Institute, the School of Design Thinking. The sandbox is this notion that design work often gets put into a sandbox within an institution. And I think I kind of hear some of these examples that it might have been occurring. So the sandbox, you know, the idea of the sandbox is you put your child there because the sandbox is a safe environment. It has sand in there. The child can play in the sand. If the child falls over, it's soft, it doesn't hurt itself. So it's very risk-free. So the sandbox, you can think of it as a demarcated and bounded space, and the design work operates in that space, disconnected from the rest of the institution. So if your institution is the health department or a big industry partner, or, you know, we have done work with the Department of Transport, they think of design sometimes as a way to do very innovative things, whether it's an app development or interface design, but the sandbox is a way for them to de-risk the involvement. So you get your contract and you put into the sandbox and you do your work in there. So the sandbox can be established either by the client as a risk management strategy, but oftentimes it's also done by the design agency itself or by a academic institution. So in that case, it's exactly that environment that you see here on the right. So that room that you see there with movable furniture, people all interacting with each other to ideate around different design ideas, that is the sandbox, because it's not reality. The reason why I'm saying this is that if you are in an institution, that usually is not the way that institutions operate. The institution operates with a hierarchy where you have, in the Australian terminology, government department usually has a minister at the very top, the ministerial appointment of the government. And then the bureaucratic side of the department would have a director general, a deputy director general, a general manager, an executive director, a director, and then there's the plebs, there's the public servants, right? And so they all report to each other. There is committees, there's task forces, there is departments and divisions within that structure. And so what you see here doesn't really, it's not compatible, I suppose, because what design thrives on is flat hierarchies. In fact, sometimes it's no hierarchies. You could see here in this picture, for instance, maybe there is the boss of the department talking to the design student, talking to the UX lead, and in the background, you got one of the invited participants from the user group. And they all work together as if they're one happy family. And that's great for the creative process of design, but it doesn't actually match with some of the way that departments work or institutions work. Institutions are often very hierarchical, and design often is very flat. And so the sandbox is, in a way, a space that we carve out where the design activity occurs, And if we do these workshops, design thinking sessions, ideation sessions, etc., it starts at a certain time. Let's invite people to come into that space. Let's start after lunch at 1 o'clock, and then we go through it. We have afternoon tea. We do a little bit more throwing around butcher's papers and crayons and post-it notes. And at 5 o'clock, the sandbox is closed, and the participants go back to their departments, to their institutions. And so that is exactly that kind of issue where there is a clash between the design space that happened within the sandbox and the rest of the institution. And so those that are participating in your design approach, they need to negotiate these two worlds. The world that they enter when they are part of workshops, ideation sessions, design thinking sessions, and they, in a way, sometimes occur in this notion of a sandbox. And then they go back to their day job. They go back to reality. They go back to their Dilbert cubicle kind of thing, and they need to take what they've learned or what the information is that has been created back into departmental institutional processes, and that clashes. Sometimes to the extent that a lot of the detail and a lot of the nuance that was produced as part of the design process, it doesn't translate into the kinds of ways an institution communicates or institution works, because there is minutes, there is memos that are sent to the director for approval, and the list goes on. So one of the things to be aware of is this first constraint, and we call it in the same terminology of what Tom and Carl did, the sandbox. The next one is the administration gap. And so I'll bring this picture in here again of the App Store, because without the App Store, you have exactly that kind of gap of a design that doesn't actually go all the way to fulfilling its aspirations, to meeting the ultimate kind of requirements. And I think, Eunice, you mentioned this kind of notion of, for instance, selections being based on funding, undercutting prices, kind of saying who's the cheapest, who can do this work the cheapest. And that contributes to this second constraint, which is the administration gap. The administration gap, in the way that Tom and Carl described it, is oftentimes a funding and resourcing issue. So designers are just engaged on a certain budget, but for the design to flourish, for the design to be successful, it must be more than just a pilot. But pilots are the kind of experiment that a lot of the institutions love doing, and then they don't get resourced adequately to be successful. And that is because there is a gap between the original department or the original entity that hired you as a UX designer, and then the rest of the institution, including the finance team or the procurement team, that would need to approve an ongoing stream of funding to make something happen. So you might come up with this great prototype, or you come up with a great pilot, and then sometimes and oftentimes it just stays like that. It's just the pilot. It's just a little experiment, and it dies. And the reason it dies is because the administration gap is disconnecting your project from the ongoing funding that is required to make that design come alive, or for it to be resourced on an ongoing basis. And then the third one is the ideological mismatch. And I think that last example we just heard before is a little bit about that. So it's about the kinds of cultures that are different when you have designers in the same room as those coming from different industries or government departments. So if you're working for, as a UX designer for a government department like transport, you might find yourself surrounded by transport planners, transport engineers, civil engineers, urban planners. They may not be designers, right? So they don't necessarily understand the way that we think. At the same time, we may not quite understand the way that they think. So there is a cultural clash. there's also sometimes language barriers, that certain terminology is used that we don't easily translate in the process. And then the other part of the ideological mismatch is the kinds of the willingness to embrace risk. So designers tend to embrace risk much more easily than those in government or industry, because designers thrive on, as I said earlier, they thrive on difference, on complexity, on the kind of precariousness of the innovation process. That's what we do on a day-to-day basis. But governments, they don't like risk. They want it to be predictable. They want it to be low or no risk. And so that is another contribution to this ideological mismatch. Now I'm going to stop and see what's in the chat here and see if there's any questions.
There are a couple of questions, Marcus.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I'll just start like some of the questions some of our participants asked before, and yeah, so I'll just put the names on that one. So can we start from?
Yeah, I see them. So the first question
okay.
you posted there, you say it's a question from Paramita. How do we implement design thinking with agile approach on institutional governments that have complex bureaucracies? So that is a good question, and that's going to be hopefully something we're going to address in that last part of the tutorial, because I wanted you to first be able to distinguish between these different constraints, and it's not limited to these three. In fact, I'm going to introduce a fourth one in a second. But once we are able to give them a name, we then in the last part of the tutorial going to talk about what can we do about it. So I'm just going to take that one on notice until we go to the next slide. And the next one is, how do you negotiate with the government to have a sandbox, considering the limited resources, time and budget they have and limited resources we have as an agency? So the sandbox in a way happens often by default, right? So if you engage into in the design process, it oftentimes isn't immediately embedded within your government or industry partner. It's not necessarily immediately embedded with your institution that you're working with. So you get your design brief, and then you take it back to wherever you are based, whether it's a design agency, whether it's a university setting, and that's where the sandbox occurs. The sandbox is kind of the environment where the design and the creative process occurs. But the reason why it's referred to as a sandbox is because the kinds of spaces that we create for our creative work to flourish and for that to thrive, it is very foreign and different to what usually happens within an institutional setting. And so the translation from the design space into the institutional space, that is where the constraint occurs, because it doesn't often happen quite as easily. And we need to be aware of that translation in order to make sure it can actually occur without that it gets jeopardized or that it gets compromised. Again, in the last section, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Then the next question is, how can we change the mindset from ticking the box of mentality to innovation? That is a tough one, because in a way, a lot of governments, they want it both ways. They talk about, oh, we need to be, the most innovative country. I remember doing these presentations in Malaysia, and the Malaysian government was present with all sorts of representatives, and they said, we want to be innovation nation Malaysia. And here in Australia, it's we want to be innovation nation Australia. And I'm sure in Indonesia, they say, we want to be innovation nation Indonesia. And so all these different senior hegemons, they talk about innovation. At the same time, the departments that make up the government, they're often very, very risk averse, because they don't want anything to go wrong. They don't want to see any newspaper headlines that, something went wrong, because that might compromise their chances of getting reelected at the next election. So it's quite a big issue to reconcile an approach to innovation at the same time that you're often working with clients in both industry and government that are very risk averse. And that's something I don't have an easy answer to, other than saying we do need to bring them along and make them understand that you can't have innovation without risk taking. They go hand in hand. If it was a zero risk environment, the chances for innovation are also zero. So they kind of are correlated, right? If you don't give us some space for risk, then you can't have a space for innovation. And there's a question from Adila: how to show top management that participatory planning practice is an effective method of decision-making processes. That is also a good question. It's a little bit outside what we are focusing on today, but there is quite a number of papers as well as examples of participatory approaches and the difference it makes, not just in terms of the quality of the design exercise, but especially at the end towards technology acceptance or user acceptance. Because if you work in a black box and you lock yourself away in a design studio, and you're not engaging with the future users of what you are designing for, chances are that they may not actually appreciate and use what you're coming up with. So being in constant dialogue and interaction with the future users actually enhances the design process, because you can continuously bounce ideas of each other. You can inform the expertise that the users bring from their domain into the design space. I got to catch up with the chat. It's rolling so fast. The next one is, really good quote: if there's no room for risk, there would be no room for innovation. Yeah, so that's, I think, that's for 2021. I don't claim that as something that I've just invented. That's out there in the innovation studies literature. So there's lots of literature on management and innovation studies, and it's recognized. The problem though is it's very hard to translate into action or into practice, because there are so many government departments and public servants, and they fear that something could go wrong because they could lose their job, or if it's a politician, they could lose their seat in parliament or their seat as a politician. And so that's what keeps them away. They understand that, innovation requires risk, but they still don't like it. All right, I might go back into the slides, and just because I'm conscious of time and I want to leave some time for questions and answers at the end, I'm going to go into the last one. So these were the three constraints that Thomas and Carl identified in their paper. The sandbox is actually really about the physical space designers engage in. The physical space can be both in-person as well as digital. The administration gap is about resourcing and infrastructuring. So it does have that correlation with that term I introduced earlier, the infrastructure that is needed for your design to flourish, for your design to be successful. If that is removed, chances are that the design is not going to be as great as what it could be. And then there's the ideological mismatch, which is about how do we understand those that are non-designers, which are public servants, could be industry people, could be accountants, could be those that we are interacting with as part of our project. I'm going to introduce one that we've introduced as part of a research study that is also looking into institutioning, and that's called the engagement theater. The engagement theater is a term that we've added to these three other institutional constraints. And the engagement theater is when participation happens, but it's fake. So there was a question just in the chat about what was the question? It was, how do we explain to top management that participation is an effective method? Now, let's take the opposite. There is top management, and top management loves participation. They come to you and say, oh, look, we are we are the city of Jakarta. We want to make sure that we engage our participants, we engage our citizens and residents and we want you to do participatory design to come up with the next smart city thing. Let's say it's smart parking or COVID-19, contact tracing, whatever the different design challenge might be. So all of a sudden you have this client and they're actually saying, oh, we want to be participatory. Now, I would be very fishy about this and suspicious, because if that is the case, I'd be questioning what is going to happen afterwards. So we have these cases where participation has been reduced to an engagement theater. The reason why we call it a theater, it's because it's smoke and mirrors. It's not real. Let's say, and this has happened, you get actually engaged into a process where you are supposed to provide feedback or input into a development process, right? So I'm going to go back to this slide here that I had earlier, this one here, okay? So let's say you're not the designer in this scenario, you are the participant. You are coming from, you're coming at this as a potential user, and you are invited by the designers to provide feedback, input, commentary. They want to test some ideas with you. Now, we've had scenarios where all of this was done and it was all theater play, because at the end of the day, all of the kind of feedback produced by the users was not listened to. So we had, for instance, engagements with city councils where all this feedback that was produced in order to inform a certain design outcome, whether it was an app or whether it was a more built environment outcome, it was not actually used in any way. All that they wanted is to be seen as engaging. They wanted to be seen as being participatory, but it was not genuine. We call this engagement theater. The other term that we sometimes use is co-optation. So it's when government and industry entities, they co-opt design methods. In this case, they are co-opting participation and participatory design methods, but it's done in a very tokenistic manner. And sometimes it's done without any commitment to be listening to the feedback that is being collected. So I might engage Eunice. I say, Eunice, what do you think? Here's my little thing. It's like a new iPhone. Oh, we've made it red. You like red? Eunice says, oh, I like it green. And at the end of that session, I delete everything. It doesn't go anywhere. None of the feedback is being paid attention to. So that is the next, the fourth constraint I want to bring to your attention. And it is locally specific. It doesn't happen all the time, but it is a risk. The risk is really that design is seen as something very, very attractive and sexy. A lot of government and industry partners, they like design approaches because they are seen as innovative. But the problem then becomes that if they're not actually committed to the design process all the way to the end, if they only want the cherry on the cake, they don't actually want to commit to paying attention and acting on the feedback that is being received through the participatory process. So those are the four that I wanted to have in this section here. This is a link in the Google Classroom that Eunice has set up, so you can have a look at this later on. It specifically talks about that engagement theater and what you might be able to do to overcome this. But now, in this last section, we are going to look at what can we do about it. But I'm just going to look at time. We've got 5:30 now. We might just take a couple of minutes to see how this resonates with anyone in the room. So out of those constraints that I've mentioned, this kind of, ideological mismatch, the engagement theater, administration gap, and the sandbox, does that resonate with you? Have you come across any of these experiences? I see John is nodding. John, do you wanna maybe tell us a little anecdote or story of where any of these you've come across?
Look, Marcus, I've been thoroughly enjoying your presentation today. it's been really interesting for me, because I suspect I'm not like many of the practitioners who are participating today, who are doing hands-on UX stuff, working with clients. I'm a researcher and a lecturer pretty much most of the time, and so just by the way, I participate in. We have these new D labs as part of our organisational infrastructure here. So we're dabbling in the wonders of design thinking and how it can loosen the institution up a little bit, and that's a great thing. But it's been interesting for me because the language you use is really, some of it is really novel to me, but you're talking about stuff that's so familiar to me in terms of the constraints and the blocks that we encounter in institutions, in hierarchies, and when we're dealing with committees and tokenistic protocols and things like that. That's why I'm smiling and nodding my head. And I guess the most recent example of that is part of my work. You know, we're all trying to pitch for money, for grants and all these things, and often the pitch doesn't land because there's a committee who presides over the process, and they tick all the boxes of who looks like they've provided the best option here, the best value for money, and often. You know, the pictures that are full of imagination and you know, promise actually don't always win, because the institutional constraint is caught up in a different kind of a mindset.
Yes. So that is a really good summary. Really, the main point really is that, from my point of view, being part of the School of Design and also talking to a lot of our design graduates that are now working in government or in industry, a lot of designers are starting to be much more sensitized to some of these problems, some of these challenges and constraints. But oftentimes they are then improving more design skills and methods. So they are trying to be perfecting their design thinking activities, coming up with new exercises, new tips and tricks within the sandbox. And so in a way, what I'm trying to do with this tutorial today is to open your eyes to the stuff that's going on outside the sandbox that design has been put into, right? So whilst we are looking at design methods, and we are trying to create better and better methods, or new methods, for instance, using different color post-it notes. Here is the new fuchsia hot pink color that has just been introduced. I'm joking. There needs to be an attention also being paid to the kinds of dynamics, challenges, constraints that are happening outside our immediate design purview. And that cannot be tackled with more design methods, with more design skills. It actually requires designers to learn a different set of skills altogether that are not really design skills, I'd say. And so that's what we're going to get into in that final part. And it is a work in progress. So it's not that you're going to get all the answers now, but I think just being sensitized to some of these constraints and challenges is already really, really useful. I'm curious to maybe hear from one or two more people what kinds of scenarios or situations they've run into that kind of correspond with these constraints I just mentioned.
We have a really interesting comment from Pak Johan. Pak Johan, you want to open your mic and share your story? Pak Johan, maybe you want to talk something. You're still mute.
Okay. In my recent FGD with Kominfo, the government, actually there's an interesting comment from the government persons. At the time we talk about blockchains. One of the what is it the point with using the blockchain is about transparency. Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
But the comment that we get from the government person is actually interesting. They said that can we use blockchain's transparency, but not through transparent.
Yes. Yeah. So they want to
Yes.
have their cake and eat it.
Yep. Actually, they want to use the technology, but they want. Can we make it not too transparent to others? Yeah,
Yes.
it's an interesting focus discussion group at that time.
Yeah.
And actually last week I attend more than one focus group discussion regarding the artificial intelligence, regarding the IoT, regarding the blockchain, and then also the one is also relating with cloud computing. But that's true. Um, Actually, many people want to use the current technology, for example, like a blockchain, but um, sometimes it's about the mindset, right? The mindset that they're still thinking, can we make something related with the technology? It's actually it's very interesting comment.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Johan. That is a great example. I just posted in the chat a paper that we've called "Garbage In, Garbage Out." The precarious link between IoT devices and blockchain in food supply chains, because we've come across exactly what you're talking about as well. So blockchain, for those that don't know, is a decentralized network. That means it's not storing data in the one location. It's distributed. That is a core design feature. And the other core design feature is that it's supposed to be open for lots of nodes to join, for lots of people to participate. And so in our work with some partners, they like the idea of blockchain because it's, as I said, it's very timely, it's very sexy. Lots of people say, oh, blockchain, whatever the problem is, doesn't matter, but blockchain will solve everything. There's a lot of hype around it. But they don't like the implications. So they want the label, they want to be seen as doing something in that space because everyone else is, but they don't like the implications. In this case, for instance, to have their data on a decentralized and open and permissionless ledger. They said, oh, make it look like cloud computing, which is the old way of doing things, which is where it's in a central database. And so that is this tokenistic approach that I mentioned earlier, the kind of engagement theater. So they are on the outside wanting to be seen as very innovative, very participatory, very transparent, all the kind of good stuff. But on the back of it, they are saying, oh, actually, no, just make it look like it. Make it smoke and mirrors. And then on the back, we just have business as usual because that's what we are used to and what we feel comfortable with. So that was a good example. Eunice, you got your hand up.
Yes. Well, I actually, I'm very interested, like from the four concept that you had, sandbox, administration gap, ideological. The most interesting for me is actually the engagement theater, because for me, even though it says theater, where it's like a fake, right? Like it's not real, but engagement for me is like it's like a one step forward. It's like when there is a challenge, there is an opportunity, right? So I think that's what I believe is like because, for example, in my relationship with a lot of politicians and things like that, it's quite the same as you shared before. They want to be seen that way, but that's not the reality. So like a kind of like my question that I always like ask myself is like how we can make them accountable, how we can make them justify what they are doing is like a really like a serve the community, really serve for the purpose of the people that they actually who actually chose them to become our representative. So I think that's a kind of like a comment from me, like maybe you got a similar experience, or maybe other comments, other further comments.
No, that's good. I agree. It's very hard because on the one hand, you got to make a living, right? As a UX designer working in industry specifically, you got to continue to win your contracts in order to, pay the bills and pay the rent and pay food. So you don't necessarily have the same level of privilege, I suppose, that sometimes academics have, where we can say, hang on a minute, this is unethical. We're not going to do this. If we then identify, for instance, these practices that are tokenistic or that are not really ethical, where interfaces or approaches are created that are pretending to be participatory, that are pretending to engage the community, but we know it's fake. We know it's actually not going to go anywhere. So it is an ongoing challenge. Do we have anyone else who wants to chime in?
Yeah, we have got Xiangxiu. Is that the main decision? Is that the main decision makers at the end play a significant for this, Prof? Can you please elaborate?
Is it that the main decision makers at the end play significance for this? So decision maker is interesting because sometimes what happens is that when you're working with a client, again, whether it's government or industry, you probably have some sort of liaison person, someone who is like the counterpart on the other side, whether it's within the government department or in an industry client. But then when it comes to sign off, it often gets escalated to a much higher level because then there is a presentation. It could, for instance, go to the department's director or to the board even. And so what is, I think, also really important is to make sure that you know right from the beginning, ideally, where it will go, what are the approval processes, is it going to be signed off and approved at that same level of the person that you're dealing with on a day-to-day, on a regular basis, or they don't have the right level of authority at the end and they need to take it higher up. They need to escalate it to another level, because then you need to find out right from the beginning, what are the expectations of that next higher level? You might be dealing on a day-to-day basis with your, everyday liaison person, and they say, oh, yeah, I really like it. It's great. You're on time. You're on budget. It ticks all the boxes. And then you give a presentation to the boardroom, whether it's within the department or within your industry client, and all of a sudden they might have completely different expectations. So it's useful to try and seek out as much information as possible. So as you're doing research for your design work that is about the users, the same kind of level of attention you want to pay to the approvals that you might need to seek. So this is actually part of that institutioning, how the institution turns from a noun into a verb, because the act of familiarizing yourself with the institution and actually starting to navigate and negotiate the different structures, hierarchies, you actually are stepping outside the sandbox and you're looking over the edge and kind of starting to gain a better understanding of how the institution works. So that might be a good stepping stone into that final part of the presentation whilst we got time. Eunice, is that okay?
Yes, okay.
So I'm going to go into the fourth and final part. And it is how we now start to overcome some of these constraints that we've been talking about. So these are all really good and wonderful questions. And sometimes there's even already, a lot of benefit in actually asking these questions in the first place, because otherwise you might get surprises. If you're not familiar or if you're not sensitized to these kinds of issues, you might just have your head down and you're just focusing on your work, on your design work. And the design work is beautiful. It's amazing. everyone loves it, and then it doesn't go anywhere, and you wonder why. That's because there are these constraints that are sometimes beyond the sandbox. They are beyond our immediate design approach, and it's really important to keep these constraints in mind and see what we can do to influence them. The first thing that we need to do as designers is to understand institutions, whether it's public or private, whether it's government or industry. And so that's kind of what I mentioned earlier. It's actually not about becoming better designers. I'm actually assuming you're all already great designers. What this is about is learning new skills and new knowledge of how institutions work. And that actually, interestingly, is its own discipline, which is called institutionalism. It gets taught as part of political science degrees. It gets taught in humanities faculties. So I don't expect you to read up too much into that field, but there is, I'm just mentioning, there is an entire field, and all they do is they study institutions. It's part of governance and policy studies. And so I'm just giving you a little glimpse into this part here, which is taken from that paper I mentioned earlier, and it talks about frames. So one way of thinking about an institution is to divide it into 3 frames: a metacultural frame, and there's the institutional action frame, which is the green part, and then there's a policy frame. I'm going to start with the policy frame because I think that's the easiest to explain, and some of you already mentioned that policies were used in your interactions and conversations with institutions as a way of saying, oh, we have to do it differently. You can't do it this way. We got to do it this way, our way, because our way is the policy. So the policy is kind of like, you know, a lot of institutions are run on procedures, and the procedures are written up in policies. And so having a good understanding as a designer of what these policies are is very, very boring, but it's also very, very necessary because it gives you a glimpse of the way the institution acts, because the policy is their bread and butter. It's like the base level of how they do things. And I think John mentioned earlier, it's also obviously universities are institutions too. And we got a whole manual of policies and procedures that is like pages and pages and pages long. And it is the blueprint of what can be done, what can't be done, as well as what you can do to change things. So policies are interesting because they also open up opportunities for design to be introduced, design outcomes to be introduced, whether it's an app or interface or whatever it is, because the policies usually have processes in there to bring about change. If you don't like something in an institution, there is usually a policy that says, this is what you got to do. You got to go and make this submission to this committee at this date on this letterhead, and you got to submit it, by this time, and then it's going to be escalated. So policies are interesting because once you understand how you can make an institution work for you, you can jump out of that sandbox and influence it on the same process that they themselves are using. The second one is the institutional action frames, and this is this green part in the picture, and it's about between formal and informal processes. So the formal processes are really what the institution does on a day-to-day basis. So if we have, say, a government entity that we're working with, and it's the Department of Transport, their day-to-day institutional actions are about making transport happen in the city or in the state. So it's about buses, trains, rail, aviation maybe. It's about roads. It's about infrastructure building. That's their day-to-day bread and butter. And so there's a whole bunch of public servants, and what they are doing and the actions that they take on a day-to-day basis within the frame provided by the policies is to make sure that the buses are arriving on time, that bus drivers get paid, that roads are being repaired or new roads are being built. That's what they do. Now, there is that formal aspect which happens, and that's the stuff that they are supposed to be doing. but there's also some informal stuff that happens. Those are the kinds of conversations in between meetings, in lunch breaks, maybe over the phone on the weekend. So it's interesting to pay attention to how institutions also have informal processes in order to get things done, and they're oftentimes not documented. Someone who's really good at understanding the informal structures and using them to get things done can also be a good ally for designers, because they're usually the ones that are not just driven by compliance. Compliance means you got your policies and procedures and you make sure that they are done exactly right. If that is the kind of person you're dealing with, very tough. If you have someone who knows how to get around certain obstacles within the institution, we call them sometimes the tacticians. In that paper, we call them tacticians. I sometimes refer to them as the cowboys, because they don't just take no as an answer. They sometimes are, taking things and they are able, and they have the knowledge and as well as the ability to get through some of these more formal hurdles and processes. So that is something to keep an eye out. And if you do come across one of these people on the inside of an institution, they are very good allies for designers, because they can become what I would call an intrapreneur. You might have heard an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs create startups and they create new businesses. But there's also this thing called an intrapreneur. They are doing change within an institution. They actually are able to understand all the different bits and pieces of an institution in order to get their way. And then the final part, the third part there of this these three sets of frames is the metacultural frame. And that is usually about what is the cultural approach the institution is based on. Is it, for instance, very risk averse, or is it actually much more open to innovation? Is it based on a very tight budget, the entire department, for instance? Or is it swimming in money? Does it have lots of money to splash around? Is it based on a very hierarchical system that is very compliance driven? Or is it, for instance, able to to allow people to knock on each other's doors, even if the one person is, the intern trying to have a meeting with the director general? Is that possible? Like, those are all cultural considerations, and they are another part of understanding how an institution works. So all of this together is really something that is completely outside the sandbox of design. It's outside the design studio. You won't be able to understand how your client operates, whether it's an industry partner or a government entity, within the design studio. So what is really, really useful is actually to leave the sandbox and go into the institution, meet them in there, spend a day there, be embedded, ask questions, be an intern, be in a way, not just a designer that is working on your design, but try and be embedded as much as possible within the institution, because that's how you can get a glimpse into how they operate. And that understanding is tremendously useful in eventually shepherding your design through these hurdles. Now, this is based as a follow-up from the previous diagram. You see that here I got the policy frames in blue again, the institutional action frames in green, and the metacultural frames in pink. And what I've done here is I've flipped them around and I've put them onto scales. So this is understanding the scale making process, which is often required for design to be successful, because we don't want our design just to be a pilot. We don't want our design just to be an experiment and then it's dead. We want it to be sustainable. We want it to be selling things. We want it to be taken up and lots of people are using it. And that often happens on a geographic scale. It can also happen on a more conceptual scale. So in this case, I'm using a more geographic scale from the hyper-local all the way to the global, the planetary. The way that these three terms, infrastructuring, institutioning, and commoning, can be deployed by designers is to pair them with different aspects of the institution. So the infrastructuring is working much more on that policy angle. The institutioning, obviously, on the bread and butter of the institution itself, hence the name, and the metacultural can be combined with the commoning one. Now, we've spent most of the time on the talking about the institutioning one, the green aspect, and so that is the one to then look at when it comes to influencing the way design gets introduced into the everyday kinds of action frames. There is a different paper that I've quoted down there that explains this diagram a bit more, and I encourage you to look at that for a bit more of an explanation of how the scale making or being able to gain scale and impact, how that works. Now, we mentioned earlier participation, and I mentioned the engagement theatre. And so I want to talk a little bit about how do we do engagement without theatre. And this is a picture taken from Shannon Matern's article that I just put into the chat earlier that has been published in the Places journal. This is French. Do we have any French speakers there?
Oui.
No, I don't think so. Yeah?
Oui, Samsu?
Somebody.
Oui.
Tu parles français?
Oui, oui, je parle un petit peu. Je participe means I participate. To participate mean you participate. It participate mean he participate. Nous participons mean we participate. And then vous participate mean you, formal way, you participate. Il profit means they benefit from it, is it?
Yeah, they profit. So what this is illustrating as a provocation is that we're all participating all the time. So you participate, we all are engaging in this process, in our case, a design process. But at the very end, it's actually not that they also participate, they being the client, they make money, they profit. So the profiteering that is being derived by the labor of everyone putting in their ideas and their creativity, the end users that are spending their time and their creative kind of energy on making this happen. But then at the end of the day, the money goes to the company, or the money goes, the benefit goes to the department. So the article that I posted there by Shannon Matern, she's looking at a project that happened, it's been abandoned by now, in Toronto in Canada, which was a smart city project by the Google company called Sidewalk Labs. And they were very engaging, they were very participatory. And Shannon's article is talking about the limits of this kind of post-it notes approach to engagement and how we can turn this around into a more fulsome and genuine approach that is also respecting the contributions that come from the participants. So I encourage you to have a look at it. It does have a lot of pictures and photos and illustrations, and this is one of them. So that's a bit of a teaser to entice you to have a look at it. And then the final one, which I think I'm quite excited about, is something that we've been working with this chap here. This is one of my students who's just finished his doctoral degree, Jock McQueenie. He came into our design lab as not a designer, but he calls himself a intermediary. And so what he really brought to us was an understanding of this approach of intermediation practice. And it's a practice that happens outside the sandbox. It's a practice that happens not when you do design. It happens when you interact and negotiate with your clients. And so his notion is that he's, in a way, by virtue of employing this intermediation practice, he's a designer as well, but one of mutual benefit. So he's trying to identify these different and sometimes they are opposing views, and he uses intermediation as a way to bring people onto the same page for mutual benefit. He calls it joining the dots. And he actually also managed to win an award for it. In Australia, we have a national award system that's called the Good Design Awards, and his project won the Good Design Award. So intermediation is a recognition that sometimes you have to employ what I'd call diplomacy with opposing forces. And that is sometimes foreign in design, because designers often come with the notion that we are all one happy family, everyone is getting invited into the sandbox, and we throw around the post-it notes and the butcher's papers and the crayons, and everyone is invited. Whereas Jock brings to this a sensibility that we sometimes need to recognize that people have different interests, and we need to use our emotional intelligence to also sometimes keep people apart, not just to bring them together straight away. If they are supposed to be brought together, we might need to bring them together at the right moment, not immediately, for instance. So there is a skill. It's actually a craft. It's a practice of being an intermediary. Some designers do this naturally because they've learned on the job. They've learned that without this skill set of being an intermediary, the design is not going to be successful once it's introduced into the institution. But especially early design graduates and more junior designers, they don't get taught intermediation practice in the design schools. Design schools focus on design. What we are trying to do here at QUT, what I'm trying to do with our group, is to motivate more of my colleagues to introduce intermediation practice as something that we teach. I believe it can be taught. There is a lot of articles written on it, which is how you communicate across these different boundaries, but also being respectful of and reconnaissance of people's standing, of their power relationships, of their motives, of understanding where they're coming from. And sometimes this is brushed over very quickly in the design world, but there is a lot of benefit from doing this differently. And finally, one tool to make this happen is a very old article that I've dug out from the ACM Interactions magazine, which is by Andrew Monk and the late Steve Howard. That's called The Rich Picture. And it's actually based on a methodology that's even older that is called soft systems methodology, which goes back to the 70s and 80s. But this is a more recent version for interaction designers. And so this particular tool, this is like an example of what it can look like. It's actually about using some of our design thinking skills, not on the product or the interface or the user experience. We are using our design skills to make sense of the institution. So we are mapping it out and making and drawing connections between who are the decision makers, who are the departments or teams that hate each other, that work together, that don't work together. And so having this mapping done, this rich picture of your client, of your institution, is tremendously helpful to have a better understanding of what needs to happen for your eventual design product, not just to survive and to be accepted, but to thrive, to be supported, to then go all the way to the way that it was conceptualized in the beginning. So I'm going to stop here. Eunice wanted me to come up with some sort of little exercise or question towards the end. And there's also lots of comments in the chat. I'm going to read up on those. Eunice, how are we going for time? I think we're just kind of on the 2-hour mark. Do you want me to introduce that kind of exercise, or?
Marcus, so this is great. We still have a lot, three questions, and I'm mindful that this is like a Friday afternoon, and some people has other commitment. So can I just put this, like the questions on the Google Classroom, and then you answer it over there? Is that
we can do that. Let's do that.
Mm-hmm. And well, there are two or three. Two. Oh well, actually there are two questions, but I think it's let's do it like put this one on the Google Classroom, and you can record your voice, or you can just write down what your answer is. If that's okay with you. And in regard to the activity, do you want to explain it right now? What should we do? The exercise, I mean.
Well, what I think would be really handy is if people kind of rethink again or recall some of these challenges that they've outlined, or even if they didn't have a chance to talk about those, whether any of these ideas from that last section of the presentation, whether it resonates, where you might kind of rethink again of a situation that you've been in, and how you might approach it differently, or what else you might be wanting to do if you come across a similar constraint in the future. I think that would be probably a good exercise. And then maybe rather than us doing it now in the Zoom, we can do it in the Google Classroom environment.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I have actually put that into questions, like your questions number 1 and number 2 and number 3. So because a lot of us here, like we have something like they have a lot of interesting ideas, but it's just probably like they are in between work, and also like we don't really have so much time to explore. So we put all your 3 questions into the Google Classroom at the moment. So we have time until Monday for everyone to answer that questions.
Yes, great, fantastic. You've been an amazing audience, and thank you, Eunice, for being a great host.
Thank you so much, Marcus. And I think we are going to close today's session, and we are going to put the recording on the Google Classroom. But before that, let's do what we usually do: take a picture together, if you don't mind. And yeah, and we're gonna put this together as a memory for all of us. All right. So Kadek, Hashim, Elida, Johannes, and Linga, can you please, Ita maybe?
Elida.
Elida. Oh, Elida cannot have the camera. Linga maybe, and Hashim. Okay. I'll take like a couple of pictures, yeah? 1, 2, 3. Smile. Another one. Smile and freestyle. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much. And just for you to know, like there will be like a little assignment for you to do for the we have put in the Google Classroom. And if you still have some technical problem, I think one or two of you have some technical problems, let me know. And we're gonna sort it out today so you can do your assignment very soon. And yeah, thank you very much, Professor Marcus Foth, for very interesting and very informative. I learned a lot today myself. I guess I believe everyone learned a lot as well today. Yeah, and I hope everyone have a nice weekend. And yeah, so we'll see you online in the Google Classroom. Okay, bye everyone.
Right. Bye.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.
Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you.